Good afternoon, my colleagues. We are back from recess. We are still on page 131, and I know Senator Clint Rizzo and Senator Therese Terlai, I think, has amendments. Senator Clint Rizzo, and your amendment is done. It's already passed. The one you asked. Oh, we didn't. Oh, because you want to get it. Oh, I apologize. Let me. Wait, what? No. Oh, it's amended. All right. Okay, then. There was an amendment to the amendment was to add the letter U, the CF vote for DOA. Are there any I asked that question. If there was any objection? No objection? Okay, now to the as amended. Does anyone else have anything to add? If not, or any comments? If no objection, motion passes. Senator Clint Rizzo, you have one for page 131. And then Senator Therese will follow. Yes, ma'am. And then you? You have one for 131? Okay. I think there's four of you. So, Senator Clint and then Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this amendment would add a new section, the section right after the speaker's section that was just added. And what it does is it just amends the current budget act that appropriates $300,000 from the general fund to the OAG. And what it does is just expands the OAG's, the Office of the Attorney General's authority to be able to use this funding not only to assist the Department of Revenue and Tax with their collections, but also to be able to assist the Department of Administration, GMH, and other Government of Guam agencies and departments in the collection of debts owed to the Government of Guam. Yes, this amendment was passed out.
Is this one that was originally written down saying line 22, page 145, or no?
Correct. It was originally put page 145. So this amendment was passed out maybe a day or two ago.
So on the top where it says line 22, it's actually on page 131.
Yes, it should now be on page 131.
And the line is not relevant until it's determined.
Because the speaker's amendment went in adding to. I was originally going to add this to line 18, which was the ending of the miscellaneous provisions section, but the miscellaneous provisions section has been extended now by the prior amendment that was added. So right after that amendment, this would go in to the miscellaneous provisions, at the end of miscellaneous provisions.
I've inquired from the panel if there's any objection. Does any of the members have any objection to this? Are you looking for a copy? All right. Okay. Okay. My colleagues, just continue looking for it. I'm not going to rush. I'm not going to move on it too fast. Senator Torres, you have a question to the amendment, ma'am?
No, I was going to speak on this and ask a question.
Please feel free to.
I have a note that somewhere when we were discussing this, you had mentioned, Mr. Chair, that there's already $150,000 funded to DRT for hiring an attorney. Does that impact in any way this amendment? Is there an overlap?
Yes, ma'am. We have to ask the author to reduce that 300 to 150 because 150 was taken from this to place it in revenue and tax for them to hire the Assistant Attorney General to assist them in all the tax issues.
Okay, that's what I recall, and that's why I was bringing it up.
That's correct. So the author can actually eliminate anything references revenue and tax because they will have their own attorney. Yes, sir.
So that 150 referencing, is that earlier in this budget bill?
Yes, it is. It's on the. It's under revenue and tax. Let me. Page 57 on the bill. It will identify subsection 3. If you just. Is the last page, the DRT, the sum of 150 is appointed from the general fund for the purpose of funding a tax attorney to provide the legal service that revenue tax needed.
Okay. Sure, I would, I have no objection to amending it to reflect the correct amount then.
Okay, but also, Senator, if we can, maybe identify as appropriate from general fund for the purpose of assisting, they will need that to assist them. You want to maybe strike that? Assisting revenue and tax? Because they'll have their own attorney.
So, Mr. Chair, what we're doing is we're doing an amendment to this amendment then to change the amount after A to $150,000. And then we're also going to strike from the third line, the Department of Revenue and Taxation from that listing, right?
Yes, ma'am. Senator Clint?
Yes, I have no objection to those amendments.
Do we have any, Senator?
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Chair. So just to reiterate what the previous speaker had amended, it's now a sum of $150,000. That's the change we're attempting to make, and then striking out the words Department of Administration on the third line of this amendment.
No, striking out, I'm sorry. I believe it was striking out Department of Revenue Tax, because they
Correct.
will be getting $150,000 earlier in the budget bill.
Okay, so 150, and then Department of Revenue and Taxation. Those are the two changes, correct?
Correct.
That's correct. Senator Therese?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I stand in support of this amendment, but the amendment to the amendment, if you look again at this floor amendment, it's actually just making an amendment to Public Law 34-116. It's not adding another appropriation into this bill. It's saying that in last year's budget, the intention was just to add in these agencies that are double underlined, Department of Admin, GMH, and other government agencies, excuse me, in addition to revenue and taxation, yeah.
That's correct.
So if you change the amount, then you're changing the amount in the original appropriation last year, which I'm sure they've almost expended.
Oh,
So
okay.
we can't, I don't think
Okay.
we should touch that amount. And
All right.
Earlier, if you remember when we were at the Attorney General section of the bill, he had confirmed that if we pass that continuing appropriation provision for the Attorney General's office, that would allow him to finish up whatever's left of this money, and then
Okay.
and with these agencies is what he wants to do.
All right, okay, then I understand where you're coming from on that
Thank
one. So,
And that, Mr. Chair, was my question, because I had noted when we were on page 57, that comment that was made by you. And so as we got eventually to the amendment, I just wanted to clarify if it was a duplication, because you had, you have the 300,000, but you placed it in one, and so the balance is in another. I'm not objecting, I'm just trying to reiterate what I believe was a note that you made earlier. So that, that's all. I don't mean to upset the apple cart. I'm just trying to confirm your remark.
yes. Senator, I'll ask, okay, Senator Clint, before I have Senator Therese comment.
Yes, I believe, so there's some confusion. I was confused with what you were mentioning earlier about the 150,000. The confusion is, I believe, between the fiscal years, as the previous speaker was mentioning. It is, Senator Talahi is correct, what she was saying.
It's just the addition.
Yes.
Okay.
So the difference, the confusion is that this 300,000 is in the current budget law that's in effect currently. So the 150,000 you were referencing earlier in this budget bill is for FY20 funds.
Correct.
So that doesn't impact this 300,000. This just expands the current authority of the 300,000 that's already in the current budget act, the current budget law for FY19.
Okay, just to add
It would
those,
just expand the authority of the Attorney General to be able to use this funding to assist these other agencies that are listed here, specifically DOA, GMH, and other GovGuam agencies and departments in the collection of debts owed to them.
But would you like to still remove revenue and tax
So
because they have? No need, Senator?
Yes, so in light of that, in light of that correct information, there is no need now to amend it to 150,000 or to strike DRT.
Okay. All right. Senator Treese, did you want to comment? No, we're good. Are there any objection to this amendment? Because there's a withdrawal of the amendment.
Yes, I'll withdraw.
Yes, ma'am. Senator Torres? Senator Torres?
No, I was just going to say, I mean, with that clarification, Mr. Chair, then yes, I'll withdraw the amendment.
All right. Are there any further objections or anyone who would like to speak on this amendment? None. Are there any objections to this amendment? None. Motion passes. Now we're at Senator Lee. You have an amendment and you're followed by Senator Therese.
Sidus Masi, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I believe my amendment was passed out yesterday, so I'll give my colleagues an opportunity to pull it up. So this is to add a new section to Chapter 8, Administrative Provisions. And this amendment is entitled Temporary Employment or Detail, Absence Due to Long-Term Military or Disability. And Mr. Chair, I can read through the entire amendment, but just for my colleagues' information, this amendment was brought to us by the Attorney General, I believe, during the hearing on the budget, and the language was submitted by them, so we're just trying to make sure that it's inserted into our budget. Notwithstanding the provisions of 4 GCA subsection 4117, in the event a classified employee shall be absent from work in excess of 30 consecutive work days due to active military service or a long-term disability certified in writing by a medical doctor, the appointing authority for an agency may temporarily assign or detail another employee to assume the responsibilities of the absent employee. Such detail or assignment may be in effect for up to the same number of days of the consecutive absence due to active military service or medical disability. The appointing authority may also fill such vacancies by limited term appointment. Such appointment may be in effect for up to the same number of days of the consecutive absence due to active military service or medical disability. And again, Mr. Chair, this is language that was in previous budget acts. We just want to make sure that we give our folks the flexibility that they need to cover down, and especially in these instances of long-term military or disability leave. Sidus Masi.
Thank you, Senator Lee. I've spoken to the panel as you were reading it off, and they have no objection to it. Does anyone have any objection or any questions? Senator Lee, Senator Kelly?
Sidus Masi, Mr. Chair. So I appreciate this amendment and I support it. There are many instances where we're coming across where because of military service or some sort of disability, we are seeing people out of their position for a long period of time, and yet our offices need to move on, especially there are deadlines, there's reporting requirements, things that need to be accomplished. So I support and appreciate this intent to get it completed, that work completed. I just wanted to ask whether the issues of if somebody is filling a position, I think it's for 90 days or more, and it's a higher paid position than they would typically work, if that comes in as any sort of consideration.
I'm sorry, Senator. A detailed appointment normally is up to 90 days.
Okay, it didn't have, I don't believe it had a limit here, so I was just thinking that there might be instances where it would be above 90 days.
Yeah, and it can be renewed once. So you'd actually quite possibly end up with a 6-month detailed appointment.
Suzuma-san, it's helpful to understand how that would work so that it would be a 90-day detail at each time and up for a possible renewal. So that helps alleviate that. I just wanted to make sure that the intent was able to be there without running into any complications. So thank you for clearing that up.
Thank you, Senator Kelly. Senator Tello?
Mr. Chair, just a point of, is there an objection on the floor for this?
No, it's just clarification. And
Oh, okay.
So far,
I thought I heard there was an
everybody's in
objection on the
support. It's
floor.
just that they wanted to comment on that.
Oh, okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes,
Just clarifying.
Senator Castro?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can see the value in this amendment. Just a follow-up, though, to the DOA director. So, is it possible to renew beyond the first 90 days with the same individual?
Yes.
Okay, so you can serve 2 consecutive 90-day detail assignments. Okay.
Yes.
So my follow-up to that would be, and this is not an objection, Mr. Chairman, I just want to make sure I'm clear on the, I recall that there was a court case many years ago, probably over 10 years ago, where an individual was detailed to a position, I think it involved the Guam Police Department, and held the position for at least 6 months, but then was removed for the position, or upon application for permanent assignment to the position, was removed and challenged it in the court. And because that individual held the position, I think for 6 months or more, was deemed to have been qualified for the position. Does anybody on the panel have that institutional knowledge? I don't know, Senator Terlahi, if you don't mind, ma'am, if you would yield. Does that ring a bell? Do you recall anything in terms of legal precedent about having to serve 6
Mr.
months or more
Chair?
and being qualified?
Point of order, the questions need to be directed to you.
Sorry,
Yes.
Mr. Chair. If someone on the panel or in the body would answer it, and the reason why I asked the question, I think it's a good amendment. I just don't want to create a loophole where someone can hold a position for 6 months or more and then having been de facto deemed qualified based on that court case. Thank you.
Does anyone in the body would like to yield to that? Because the panel has no knowledge of that. It might have happened a while back, and that's something that's, I think, the Madam Speaker, do you remember that? Yeah, it might be a lot older. So there's nothing current. As far as the panel is concerned, there's nothing current or has happened in the past couple of years that they're aware of. Okay, does anyone want to yield to that? Otherwise, I understand what your concern is. It's just to make sure we're protecting also the government. We don't get anybody to keep staying on and then they have to qualify for the position. Senator, okay, so you're okay? Okay, if you don't have, Senator, you object? Okay, Senator Tello?
Mr. Chair, so DOA said there's nothing in the books that would do exactly what the previous speaker had mentioned for the additional employee if someone is taking somebody else's place for that period of time. And there's nothing in the books right now that has done that, or no case at all has been, since you've been there, Mr. Burns or Lester, that you have heard of? Particular case that has happened? Sorry, I can't hear you, not on the mic.
Neither of us has any knowledge of that case, so I can only assume that it's not an impediment because this, detailed appointments go on all the time.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure, because
Okay, and a follow-up question from Senator Castro?
So I have a follow-up question, Mr. Byrne. So I don't know why I'm of the understanding that no individual employee of the government of Guam can be detailed for more than 90 days and then be reappointed to the same position for another 90 days. So you cannot extend beyond 90 days. Is that true? Or is that a true statement, or do I stand corrected? I just want it one more time for the record.
It wasn't my impression, but I'll check and advise you.
I think it's an important point, Mr. Chairman, if I could follow up, because what I am aware of is you cannot serve 30 days consecutive without compensation. I'm aware of that. You have to be compensated at the 30th day and beyond. I think there's a provision in the personnel rules and regulations that no member of the government of Guam could be appointed beyond a 90-day period. And I'd like us to look at that. If you choose, Chairman, to proceed with the vote, that's fine. But I just don't want us to move forward and not err on the side of caution, because I think that 90-day appointment detail assignment is predicated on case law, just for your information, but I could be wrong.
Madam Speaker.
If I may, Mr. Chair, there has been case law to that, and if we can take a moment's recess just so that I could.
Yes, we'll take a moment recess. We're back from recess. Senator Castro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the brief recess. And again, I rise in support of this amendment. It's a great amendment. And after conferring with the BBMR director, he did show me a provision of the statute that says the second term for the 90 days could only be possible if you had been deemed qualified. Even more so, an applicant profile has to accompany the detail assignment. So I appreciate that clarification from BBMR, and it's important that the record reflect that. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I withdraw my objection, and I support the amendment. Thank you.
Are there any further comments or questions any of the members would like to offer to the amendment? There being none, are there any objection? Motion passes. Now we are at Senator Sabina.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have an amendment for section 17.
Which one are we, which one?
Section 30, Section 30. So I bookmarked that earlier.
Okay, to amend the, section 2 of section 30?
Yeah.
Page 30, page
So
131. Okay?
So there are two actually versions of an
There's two?
amendment. But, so the second one that was produced, I'll just go ahead and read the amendment. So it's reporting requirements beginning, so June 2020, the Department of Revenue and Taxation shall provide an annual report to Imagahagan.
Senator, would that be the correct one?
Yeah, that's
So
like-
that we advise everyone to take the other one and fold it up?
Yeah.
Put a
that's
line
correct.
across so that it doesn't get mixed up? The one that identifies March 15, 2021 is not the correct one, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So, shall provide an annual report. So the changes were the dates, because I was informed that 2021 would be outside the purview of this budget bill. And 2020 would, June 20th would give enough time after the April filing to be able to collect that data. The cumulative number of W-2 forms, I know that's originally in the law. I had some time to revisit that, and there may have been some issues with, even though it's a cumulative number, there may have been issues with disclosure. And in place of that would be self-reporting using a form created by DRT. So the change would be, so to substitute for the cumulative W-2 forms, it would be a self-report upon use of the exemption. So in this particular amendment, the language is the Department of Revenue and Taxation shall require businesses relying on the exemption to report on an annual basis indicating how the funds saved from the exemptions were spent. The report form, which will be created by Department of Revenue and Taxation, will include the reporting of increases in salaries, wages, hiring of new employees, training, capital improvement projects, travel, other areas where savings have been spent as a result of utilization of the exemption. The Department of Revenue and Taxation shall transmit a consolidated report and findings of businesses relying on the exemption to Mahagagan Guhan and Legislature in Guhan on June 20th, 2020. So that's the amendment proposed.
Thank you, Senator Sabina. I've spoken to the panel, and the panel is not in objection. They actually like this one. Are there any members who would like to speak on this amendment? Yes, objection? Okay. Senator Trees.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I could ask the author to yield about the removal of the cumulative number of W-2 forms filed, is there a reason to remove that? Huh?
Is my yes, I'll yield to the question. Or, I guess it's my understanding that it might be in non-compliant with. So I guess when you're reporting out W-2s, there's a certain sort of sensitivity behind it, as far as compliance with disclosure laws. So that was the issue, I think.
Yes, when you're dealing with financial disclosure, federal statute trumps it. You can't just share that. That's correct.
Even though it's a cumulative number. That was my understanding. I'm sorry, were you asking the panel?
So I guess I want to know, has Revenue Tax been reporting a cumulative number to us, or they've just not ever reported that?
I think, Senator Therese, we're talking about a business tax that goes in effect in January, the tax exemption, and that's what I think Senator Sabina's concern is, to make sure that it reports it. Revenue tax will have to generate a report that businesses have to fill in, and then they'll be able to report it back to us.
All right. Yes. Well, I stand in support of this amendment, Mr. Chair. It's a good amendment. Thank you to the sponsor.
Thank you. Senator Lee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I strenuously object to this amendment. The whole point of Bill 1, Mr. Chair, was to help to support our small businesses. And it's really difficult as a small business owner in the past, it's difficult to just get through the day and try to still come out in the black. You know what I'm saying? And it's really important that all of their time and effort and energy go to helping their businesses to thrive. And so I think it's important to look at the language in this amendment. So we are requiring, or we would be requiring small and micro businesses to report on an annual basis to indicate how the funds saved from this exemption were spent. And if you look at the revenues and expenditures of a business, it's really difficult to determine how perhaps the money from something that you, Mr. Chair, might have purchased from my business, exactly how that dollar was spent, or how that dollar, it's kind of a tracking nightmare. And I think the idea of tracking these revenues and being able to identify maybe the return on our investment as a government is a worthy one. It would be really difficult to truly identify that until many, many years from now, when you give the opportunity for businesses to thrive. But we need to continue to have an environment that's business friendly. We want our micro and small businesses to grow. And I think that putting so many reporting requirements on these businesses over and above what we've already included in Bill 1 would be counter to that. And so I urge my colleagues to reject this amendment. Tsidusmasi.
Thank you. Does any other members would like to speak to this amendment? Senator Clinton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also question whether or not this amendment is germane. It seems like it's more like it's amending Bill 1, as the previous speaker was mentioning, rather than actually amending this budget bill. However, it obviously is being added to this budget, attempted to be added to the budget bill, but this section is talking about reporting requirements of Department of Revenue and Taxation. So this section in the budget bill is requiring that DRT provide reports to the governor. And then at the end of it, now it's throwing in that businesses relying on a certain exemption have to furnish a report to DRT. So I question if this is the proper way to do this, or if this should require actually amending the actual bill that the previous speaker referenced.
Thank you. Senator Torres, ma'am.
Mr. Chairman, I think that this sort of reporting requirement also puts an unfair burden on these small businesses that qualify for the limited exemption for certain small businesses as opposed to others. And so in terms of it being an unfair burden, I think that I would oppose this amendment. And, to the mover of the original Bill 1, the idea was to allow them to stay into business and to give them more breathing room to expand their businesses. So I would, in the spirit of promoting, survival in the business world, we not make it harder on them to do business.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Torres. Does anyone else would like to speak to the amendment? Madam Speaker, would you like to speak to the amendment, ma'am?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, as I look at this amendment and kind of appreciate what the good author of the amendment is trying to do, I must share the same sentiments as the previous speaker and the author of Bill 1 that was passed. As we look at the realization of seeing this done, I know, if I'm not mistaken, I know that there are already protocols in place as to how small businesses need to file and how they have to report monthly on their taxes and all that stuff. So it's also going to probably be very, very cumbersome and probably assess another fee to that small business business vendor to having to pay for an accountant or somebody to do that extra work. So I really do have a concern about this amendment, not because I don't appreciate reporting requirements, it's just because I know that the effect, and that would mean that all the businesses will have to be noted and publicly noted online, if I'm not mistaken, which I don't know is a violation of, no, well, okay.
Madam Vice.
Just a point of inquiry for the sponsor of the amendment, Mr. Chair. I see that it's, thank you, I see that it is requiring additional reporting or a more thorough reporting. And usually we don't put this extra bureaucratic layer in government unless there's been some malfeasance of some kind to prevent it from occurring again. And so perhaps the sponsor of the amendment, maybe there's a purpose that this amendment is being proffered. I'm sure it's just not a great idea, Ferry, just to say, I thought of this and let's just add it in there for, arbitrarily just do something. And so perhaps maybe the sponsor perhaps can express a specific reason or the intent of this amendment, why the sponsor was so compelled to move this amendment forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to speak before I ask the sponsor, the author of the bill?
That was a point of inquiry for the
Oh,
sponsor.
point of inquiry. Senator Sabina, do you have a,
Mr.
would you like to
Chair.
yield to the?
Yes, I yield to the question. So I guess one would have to go back to the dialogue when this bill was passed. And the issue at stake was, or at least the argument that was made was that this exemption would stimulate the economy for small businesses. And so the reason for the reporting requirement is to provide some transparency and accountability of this exemption providing that sort of stimulus. And so it's a way to measure how this exemption, how the money is being used, whether it is actually going into growing these small businesses. And so one of the measurements that was used was the increases in W-2 amounts. And so it's basically an extension of that dialogue. And being that it's in the budget bill, it gives an opportunity to revisit that dialogue and perhaps even improve upon it. And I do understand, I take the point that perhaps it's best dealt with in a separate bill. But also the issue has come up as whether putting in the year 2021 is germane to this bill because the budget is for the year and the date goes beyond this budget year. So I think maybe at least address that issue where it would be germane to be within this fiscal year. So that would be my response to the question.
Senator Lee.
So just Masi, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to provide additional information with regard to what a previous speaker had mentioned in terms of having these micro and small businesses potentially contract out for financial assistance in order to provide this annual report. It's my understanding that the market rate for doing just a basic, very simple annual report, which is much simpler than this requirement, would at least be at a minimum about $50. And so that's at the minimum. And again, requiring micro and small businesses to come out of pocket, to take the time to meet with somebody, to provide this information to them, and to pay them upwards of $50 an hour for their time, it runs counter to everything that we were trying to do in Bill 1, to all of the ways that we were trying to stimulate our economy and really support our small and micro businesses, Mr. Chair. So I just re-register my objection.
Senator Sabina, are you,
Yes, I would like to actually make amendment then, based upon this dialogue right now, to my amendment, if that's possible.
you want to make an amendment to your amendment
Yes.
right now?
Yeah.
Okay,
So-
I think our colleagues would like to know what it is before they actually speak. You have one more question, Senator Torres, first?
Yes, if the proffer of the amendment will yield, my question is, in putting this requirement, you're now essentially mandating them to do this. If they do not, what are the consequences? Because being qualified to avail of this limited exemption is simply that. You just have to meet the threshold. And now you're adding another qualification, which is this reporting requirement. So my question to the author, if you were to now have this second reporting requirement as a qualification to avail of this exemption, what is the penalty for not reporting?
Thank you. Senator Sabina?
So, Mr. Chair, I would like to respond with the amendment, if that's okay, because I feel that, the mandate is creating some sort of tension and, concern. So I think that instead of require, maybe survey businesses, so not all businesses, it won't mandate for them to do that, but that Department of Revenue and Taxation can sample a portion of those businesses to see how that exemption was utilized.
There is an amendment to the amendment before you speak, so that we can address that. Where would you put it? Will the Department of Revenue and Tax shall survey all businesses relying on the exemption? Is that where you're looking at putting it? Where are you going to put it at?
Survey, yeah, exactly, survey businesses relying. So it doesn't mean they're going to necessarily ask all of them, but maybe a sample of the businesses that are using this exemption. So it's not a requirement.
So the Department of Revenue and Taxation shall survey a sample?
Survey businesses relying on the exemption.
Okay, so you're just striking also required to be survey, the word survey.
Yes.
Are there any objection to that? You object to that? On the double line of the amendment, the Department of Revenue and Tax shall survey business relying on, there's no mandate no more. It's the department has to do a survey on any business that are relying on this exemption. It's on the department. Yes, Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I object to this amendment as well. I just think it's really important for us to think about who in our government would be working on these reporting requirements. So we know that the business license branch of DRT that would be responsible for administrating all of these additional requirements, the fact is they're already struggling. It's already difficult for our government employees to keep up with that and for our businesses to be served in a timely manner. So if it would be challenging for them to comply and to monitor the current reporting requirements, then why would we ask to extend that? It's challenging for me to wrap my mind around that. I feel like they don't have forms for other types of information that the current law mandates to report, or they use forms that they do currently have for multiple uses, which creates inaccuracies in reporting. And again, this division is already strapped, Mr. Chair. So I just would hate to put additional strain on their already limited resources.
Thank you. Senator Kelly, you're next.
Sejus Masi, Mr. Chair. So since we have a panel of people who are good in finances, I thought I would ask some of their guidance. It seems to me that we might attain some of the information that we're interested in because, you know, I do see value in being able to say to the community, this program is doing good things for our community. But perhaps we would be able to gain some of that assurance and have some figures that support it if we just looked at the general increase in profitability of the small businesses. Maybe if we looked at the number of growth in the number of small businesses as compared to the year before. Do you have other suggestions as to ways that you could look at the macro data and provide us some of those assurances without having to, I do agree that it could really be a struggle when we're talking about these micro businesses. It seems to me that these things are more geared toward large businesses, travel, improvement projects, training, and things like that. But anyways, are there ways of looking at the larger set of data where we might attain some assurance?
You know, the regulation of business is interesting. I mean, businesses have to fill out tax returns, and they often have to fill out surveys by the Bureau of Economic Affairs, who often make inquiries similar to these, but not exactly the same, because it's not tied to any one tax credit. It's just a survey of economic data. You know, so some of this information is certainly interesting. Could it be included on an enhanced tax form? Yes, but I guess...
Well, my question really is, instead of utilizing Department of Revenue and Taxation's time in that manner and having the companies themselves try to figure out, especially if they're very micro, trying to figure out some of these sort of issues, that if we might be able to just look at the profitability of our small businesses, do they seem to be doing better this year than they were the year before by getting some additional support? Does there seem to be more small businesses that are building up over time? Can just some general analysis like that provide us some data, would you say, or other types of just very general data?
Yeah. That information could be generated by Department of Revenue and Taxation, and I don't think they would need any further input from the businesses that are being surveyed here. They could take it from the existing tax returns.
Right, so that helps get to what I was looking for, that there's sufficient data by what they're submitting to be able to provide some of that analysis that could be helpful enough to give us a general understanding of the picture.
Yes, but I don't think that they've got the ability or systems at this moment to do it, so it might take them a while to get to that point.
So just Masi, I think that provides me enough information of understanding that I think we could get this information to give us enough assurance on its own with what they're already submitting.
Thank you. Senator Sabina, you had your hand up. Ma'am?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'll withdraw my amendment.
Thank you. We will now move to... There's a motion to withdraw. Are there any objection? None. Motion has been withdrawn. We are now moving to Senator, I think, if I'm correct, yes. Oh, Vice Speaker. Okay, which, trying to figure out which sheet we're on. If you could give us a... Could you, okay, let's just take a short recess. My colleagues, we are back from recess. Senator Vice Speaker Nelson, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to make sure we are all on the correct page, there was an amendment that was passed out that says page 17. However, we had to change that page, and it should read page 131. I think some of the pages went around correcting it. Then we placed it in section 31. This was before we approved other amendments. So I'm just going to request that the section be determined upon the order of amendment that passed. This amendment is the consolidated expenditure report requirement, which reads, within 30 days following each fiscal quarter, the superintendent of GDOE shall provide to Iles, Latour, and Guahan and post on the GDOE website a consolidated expenditure report which shall include the authorized spending levels, encumbrances, and expenditures quarterly and year-to-date of GDOE, enumerated by school and/or division within the department. Such report shall also be transmitted by hand delivery or electronically to each school principal. So, Mr. Chair, this is just, we made the provision in the beginning of the original bill, the budget bill, in the provision for each school. And so here, when we were inquiring about the capital improvement projects with the principals, where is your school at? They did not know the exact timeline when their schools would be fixed, like the restrooms would be fixed, the awnings would be fixed. They're not aware of that timeline. And so really this is to set in place that perhaps in the upcoming fiscal year budget 2021, we're all on the same page, and we can ensure that the money goes directly to the schools, of course giving the superintendent the flexibility to have that transfer authority. And so this is just part of the working towards the original budget bill that we had, where we wanted to see the money in each school. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Vice Speaker. The panel thanks you for this amendment. Does anyone want to speak to this amendment? Senator Therese.
I just want to say I love this amendment too, though. I stand in support of it, Mr. Chair.
Does any of the members like to speak to this amendment? If not, are there any objection? There being none, motion passes. Now we will move to Senator Therese Terlai, and then followed by Senator Kelly. And then you, Senator Lee? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd first like to confirm with the panel or with OFB that, so the intention of this budget or the projections that we've made and the calculations that you've made for appropriations were to include increments going forward, right? And then he's saying yes, so.
You're correct, Senator.
All right, and then what about merit bonuses? Because I think those were also put on freeze. So if they're not, if there's no language in the bill that they're not on freeze, I just wanted to confirm that means they're open again?
In the determination of the appropriation for the department, merit bonuses were not included or were not considered.
All right, but we're not restricting it by this bill either.
I don't recall anything in the bill that restricts awarding the merit bonuses.
All right, and when the judiciary was here yesterday, they were very concerned about, the cut to their budget is going to affect increments, and while, they said their judicial council controls whether they implement increments or not, I know that their allotments have a lot to do with, how they're going to act over there in response to that budget cut. So I just wanted to get some confirmation from the panel as to the judiciary's allotments for 2020, according to statute, are not supposed to be restricted. And do you see any potential restriction on those allotments? I know they said in 2018 their allotments were really held and it really impacted them. In 2019, I think it's been much better, right? They've got about...
In 2019, there was no restriction on the judiciary.
All right, and 2020, there should be no restriction either?
No.
All right, and I appreciate that. Then, Mr. Chair, I'd like to just add this provision then regarding the restatement of increments. It's kind of marked section 19, but I think if all these other provisions go in here regarding, yeah, then we're going to put it here. It will just be an additional section to this chapter, or else,
Yes, ma'am.
yeah. So it says, restatement of employee increments. An employee who had an anniversary date during FY 2019 and received an evaluation recommending an increase shall be entitled to the increment beginning on October 1st of fiscal year 2020. The employee's anniversary date for purposes of evaluation and determination of eligibility for an increment shall not change. Implementation of payment of increments shall be made as funds become available. This is just to have it implemented uniformly by all the agencies, as you know, sometimes we see them implemented differently. So this is intended so that they will all be implemented the same by all the different agencies, including the Attorney General's office. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Senator Chulai. The panel is in agreement and also thanks you for this amendment. Does anyone have any questions to this amendment? Yes, ma'am, Senator Tello.
Just point of inquiry, is this the one that's line 22, page 145?
Yes.
Yes,
It is?
we have to
Okay, thank
change
you.
that to say 131.
Thank you.
Are there any objections or anyone that would like to speak to this amendment? There being none, are there any objections? None, motion carries. Senator Lai, you still have,
Oh, that's all I have passed out, so I'll come back when I get the other one passed out. Oh, do you see another one there?
you still have, I think the temporary employment detail and.
I think those have all been done by someone
they're-
else already, yeah.
Okay,
If, yeah, I'm pretty sure.
all right, Senator Kelly, you have, we're looking for your amendments. If you can.
Yes,
speak.
I have one that says alignment of hospital rates and fees.
What was it? Which one is it? Could you read the top part so we can, what does the top part say?
It says to add a new section, as many others do, alignment of hospital rates and fees.
Tom, can you make sure that everyone has a copy? We're looking for ours up here on the top.
And there should also be a letter of support from
The hospital rates.
Lillian Posadas.
Senator Kelly, would you please just read your, your amendment?
Hungen. So this is to add a new section. It says 31, but there are many new section 31s that can be determined. To Chapter 7, beginning on page 131. Section 31, alignment of hospital rates and fees. Notwithstanding any other provision of law, the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority, GMHA, shall formulate a fee and rate schedule of applicable hospital fees and rates that are, and let's cross out not, that are less than the prevailing Medicare rates. Really, my intention was for it to be up to, but less than the prevailing Medicare rates. Within 60 days upon the effective date of this act, GMHA shall submit the adjusted fee and rate schedule to y Legislature in Guahan. And I do have a letter of support. It was submitted as well. And so hopefully everybody has a copy here. It's from the Chief Executive Officer serving as the Guam Memorial Hospital Administrator, Ms. Lillian Perez Posadas. And so she just mentions that she's immensely thankful for the opportunity to review and give their input, and most especially for introducing this much needed and extremely beneficial 2020 budget bill amendment for the hospital. The amendment will definitely help the hospital in its capacity and efforts to generate revenues for the services we provide. So just to be clear, in the first version of this amendment, it was written a little bit differently. What I've done is rather than it going into effect immediately, it gives the legislature a chance to visit the recommendations by the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority and be able to hold a public hearing if needed, but be able to really think very thoroughly about the full implication of impact. So what I'd like to say just briefly is we all know that for decades the hospital has struggled financially. And we must figure out ways to help it get closer to being able to sustain itself. There are many issues why it struggled, but the main point is that we really need to help it have its tools to be more sustainable. One of the weaknesses found and presented to this body relate to its inability to generate revenues, collect fees, and secure revenue sources that compensate for the care of a variety of our patients. And without enough income, the hospitals cannot expand and upgrade its infrastructure as we have been talking about earlier throughout this process. They're at the point of needing to maintain and replace supplies, equipments, capital improvement projects, and so forth. So what we need to do is try to help them come up with these ways that they can be better sustaining themselves. There are some processes in place. Typically, annually, they can revisit their fee schedule, but there are limitations as to what they can do in that regard. And in this opportunity, it allows them to look at what's going on in the states, look at nationally what the Medicare rates are, and be able to allow us to understand what those rates are, what the rest of the nation is charging, and come up with a reasonable but important to be sustainable or more sustainable solution so that we're able to better recuperate our costs. I mean, one of the questions that ran through my mind when I was having this discussion with her, this communication back and forth is, you know, why would the states be charging more and being able to recuperate more than us? And so if we can figure out a way to get closer to what other entities are able to recuperate, or figure out a way to get towards that, I think that information is important for us. Information can be power in instances like this. So I hope for people's favorable condition to at least getting us this information so we more fully understand the landscape.
Thank you. We will start with the Vice Speaker, and then Senator Lee, and then Senator Tello. Vice Speaker, ma'am?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A point of inquiry. Do we need to have this provision in order for them to produce or show us an idea of what the fees are going to look like and what fees will be charged? Because an example is the judiciary started listing a bunch of fees as of August 1st, 2019, where there wasn't a fee. You know what I mean? Like, for example, domestic violence support. The current fee was $0, which means they never charged for it. And now they are charging, I think, I don't know, maybe like $75 to $150, around that, right? So do we really need to have this provision saying that they can authorize it? Or is there a way that they can show us what their plan is before we even move forward and say we're looking at authorizing these fees? My concern is that when we were last term, when we were trying to incorporate fees for Guam Fire Department, the cost and the items of each fee there was no real rhyme or reason. They just went by a national average, but they did not consider the economy, they did not consider the demographics, and they definitely did not consider, whether they were able to collect this or not. And the previous speaker says the hospital is having issue collecting fees. So now we're going to raise fees. We're giving the hospital authority to take on this endeavor, to look at what they want to charge for and raise fees not less than the Medicare requirement. Not less than the Medicare
the not
rates.
is crossed out.
Says,
The not was removed.
right, that are not less than the prevailing Medicare rates.
No, the not was striked out.
Oh, we're going to strike out the not now.
They striked out the not while she was reading it.
Okay, so it must have been there was an amendment to the amendment that was made.
On her introduction, she asked that they
We
just
strike it out.
just strike the
Strike out.
not after
So that
it
was
reviewed.
still an amendment, okay.
Yes.
Okay, so that's fine, but what are we doing? Are we going to move this provision first, or are we going to demand that the hospital show us what they're looking at raising, and then we're saying, okay, maybe we can move forward with this?
So basically, you're asking that it come to the body and then we
Right, I'm
assist
asking if it's
to
necessary to
facilitate.
even move, I'm asking if it's even necessary to include this.
Okay.
Is this measure dependent on whether or not the hospital can reassess the current fees that they charge? Or can they do it without this amendment, this requirement?
Senator Kelly, do you yield to that question?
Hungin. So it's a good opportunity to talk about some of these issues. There are some processes in place, but they tend to be rather multi-tiered and bureaucratic. And so what we want to do at the public hearing that was held earlier this year, one of the informational briefings, I believe, this matter was brought up, that there is this disparity that is really, in a sense, crippling what GMH is able to recover in costs. So there is a process, but there are quite some limitations to it, and then it's multi-tiered. And so, one of the limitations, as I had mentioned earlier, is that they're looking at being limited to 5%, for limitations to 5% per year. And really, without looking at the landscape and understanding where we're at, we don't know if that's a reasonable limitation or whether they need to look at something something larger. And that's why it was really important to me, you know, why I was saying information is power, that it's important to be able to really understand what that landscape is. If they follow along by not going any more than 5% a year, and now they're finding themselves very much behind, perhaps, compared to other entities on island and off island, the 5% rate might not allow them to ever catch up. So it's getting that information. What is that true information as to what is going on in the states? What are the typical levels in the states, and how do we compare? By having that information come back to the legislature, it absolutely allows us to say, rather than just adopting something that exists in Minnesota or California or Florida that may or may not have a relevant or a like community or situation, we can definitely look at it and say, okay, we have this information, we know how near or far we are from what other states are doing, and we can put in those factors that because of our economics, because of our demographics, because of our other situations, it gives us that opportunity, that information to come up with an approach or work with the hospital to come up with an approach that makes sense for our community, which is, you know, what we're here to do, and makes sense for getting the hospital to being at least closer to sustaining themselves.
Vice Speaker, did that?
No, Mr. Chair, the question was, do we need this provision for the hospital to go ahead and do this assess already? What's stopping the hospital from doing it now? They have the authority to do it. They have the authority to assess these fees and to make the recommendations to change. Not unless you're talking about a different fee, which is that 5% in statute, that they can only raise fees up to 5%. Now, if
Correct.
they're looking to raise it higher, then we need to be very clear what we're saying in this amendment.
Right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Kelly, did?
So, as I mentioned, it's a multi-layered approach. It does have some limitations to it, such as the 5%. And it creates just that opportunity to have that dialogue, to require them to do that, to submit that information in a timely manner, and therefore we can tackle it all together. We make sure that it's happening, we make sure that it's happening in a timely basis, and then we make sure that we're working all together on seeing what seems like a reasonable solution. So if we don't do this here, I don't know what the plan is, when they will visit it, in what way they'll visit it. Will they not want to go above the 5% increase, even though it might make more sense for them? In this way, we're making it very clear. We're putting a very clear timeline, and then we can work on it all together.
But Senator Kelly, I don't think you answered the question, and I understand where you come from, but is this, generally the only simple question, is this needed for them to do what they should be doing anyway, seeking out and coming up with a possible rate increase? I think that was the question. But Senator Lee, you have a question? And then we're going to go down for everyone. Senator Lee?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, this is also for the author of the amendment, if she will yield. And I can appreciate the information that she shared. And yes, we all know the challenges that are facing our only public hospital. But I think it's also important to clarify if this is how this information will be received by the legislature. Will we receive it through the AAA process or another process? Because I think those things are in place to make sure that the public has an opportunity to comment. And it's also my understanding that just a few years ago, Mr. Chair, this body passed a law that would increase the hospital's, it was a summary of proposed fee services. And the increases range from 12% to more than 5,000%. So many of the fee adjustments were to occur specifically in the radiology division, but I know that a number of hospital fees were raised at that time. And so I guess my question to the author is this an attempt to bypass the AAA process? And if so, what other public process are we allowing for our people to ensure that they have some say in these fees being raised?
Senator Kelly, do you yield to the question?
Pungin. So in following the process that is outlined, it says just very simply that their fees for new services and medications or supplies of increases of more than 5% are simply forwarded to Legislature in Guam for approval. Prior to the approval, and these are the processes that we can follow, prior to the approval and ratification, public hearings must be conducted. So if something is submitted to Legislature in Guam, we can have public hearings, they note, and approve the increase or new fee, so that we can have those processes of having public hearings. They've outlined similarly that that's the procedure, that they would be forwarded to the legislature, and then the legislature could have public hearings and potentially approve the increase or new fee, or disapprove or amend.
Thank you. Senator Lee, I'm not too sure if that answered it or not.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, it's my understanding that that GMH already has the authority to raise fees under the AAA process, as well as to raise fees up to 5% on an interim basis. So I'm just not sure if, my concern is I wouldn't want to skirt the AAA process, and we all understand that the AAA process is there, why it's there, and it's there to protect our people. And so I just want to make sure that if we're moving forward increasing certain fees, that we give the public an opportunity to comment, an opportunity to give us feedback on that. Especially when it comes to our only public hospital, because a lot of times these fees are limiting access for people. And the worst public health scenario would be for people to not want to go to the hospital for an emergency or an urgent health situation because they're terrified that they won't be able to pay the bill on the way out. And I know that that's not a limiting thing, that many times the hospital accepts them regardless of their ability to pay, but that's just a huge concern for me, Mr. Chair, because I've heard that from people in our community. So I don't know. I'm going to take a few minutes and just get a little bit more information on this amendment.
All right.
Thank you.
Senator Tello?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I'd like to commend the author of this amendment to trying to do something to assist Guam Memorial Hospital. And we all know it's in dire need, and in need of our help as well. First, on the amendment, prevailing Medicaid rates, if I'm not mistaken, prevailing is actually not even needed in here because it's already set in standard yearly, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm not quite sure if you're speaking about Medicaid, Medicare rates going up like every 3 months, 4 months, because if I'm not mistaken, it's done yearly and set yearly. One of the biggest concerns I have is that any type of change right now, while we're in the process of negotiating for a health insurance contract, is a big concern at this point. We don't need any more protests going on because of it. So, I know you're in the midst of doing that right now, and if it might jeopardize it, that's a big concern, because we know that whenever anybody raises rates, it's going to affect the cost for everybody else, regardless. And I agree that there is in place a process right now with the AAA process, but with that AAA process has something very important that's needed in any time you do a rate change, and that is an economic impact statement that's needed. That's a very important piece of information and data that's used when assessing any kind of rate change. It might be good for the Guam Memorial Hospital, but is it good for our community? And this statement will reflect that in a AAA process scenario. I was hoping that as soon as Guam Memorial or the director came into play, that she would already start the process of a AAA. I spoke to her about this several months ago, and I was hoping that they would move forward. But, you know, I want to thank the author for continuing to fight this, what some people consider a lost cause, because Guam Memorial Hospital, anybody who walks into Guam Memorial Hospital, whether they can pay for it or not, can be seen, but then at the end of the day, if they can't pay for it, who's going to flip the bill for this? The people. So, and I hate to do this, but Mr. Chair, I have to object to this amendment. But again, I with all due respect, I you know, to the author, I commend her attempt to do something like this. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Torres?
Mr. Chair, I rise in support of this amendment. We're dealing with a situation where our hospital really needs a shot in the arm. And one of the things that is urgently needed is for them to adjust their rates. There is, within statute 10 GCA chapter 80, the guidelines for adjusting rates. And they, as was stated previously, they have the authority to do it, and there are steps involved, the last step of which is submitting their adjusted rates to and fees to the Guam Legislature for approval, which this amendment also reflects. So I think that if we can, through our power, allow for barriers to enable GMH to come up with these rates, and they are going to be less than the prevailing Medicare rates, that we do give them that opportunity to fast track something, because ultimately it will come to the legislature for approval, and the legislature has the, you know, the opportunity at that point to solicit public opinion. So I think that if we're looking at ways to help ourselves quicker and eliminate barriers, I don't see within the Chapter 80 of 10 GCA why this is not a reasonable consideration given the dire state of our hospital and the need to bring rates up to a standard that will allow the hospital to collect what is more aligned with their expenses. Because right now their fees are way below what they should be collecting. So, and then this brings them more on par with our private hospital as well. So I would support this amendment, and I think that the caution here is it ultimately will come to us for approval, and at that point we can solicit all the testimony that we need for ratification of it or not.
Thank you, Senator Torres. Senator Taylor, you have a follow-up?
Just a real quick question, Mr. Chair. According to this amendment here, by bypassing the administrative rules to move forward, there's nothing in here that said it needs approval by the legislature. Huh? So it's going straight to us just to say, okay, this is what we've decided, and that's that, and here's a copy of our rate increase. But there's nothing in here that allows the legislature to ratify these rates. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr.
Thank
Chair,
you.
point of person.
Senator Kelly, would you like to speak? Because I was going to ask the oversight chair to speak on this.
Okay,
And I don't know if
I'll
she-
mention a couple of things, and then the oversight chair would be good to hear from as well. So we could put in some amendments that they are, that this amendment, so if we're going to amend the amendment, we could put in the for approval there, and then again, you know, it's outlined that this is something that they do, that they forward it to the legislature, and then the legislature can hold these public hearings, and it's a good opportunity to hear from the community. It's a good opportunity to hear from the Memorial Hospital Authority. It's a good opportunity to hear from the community, and it's a good opportunity for us to think about what is realistic for our community, given our economy, given our demographics, and other such factors. But having that balance out with trying to help them be more sustainable, because one way or the other, it's either coming out through tax dollars, as we just set aside $10 million and more, or it's coming out with trying to help them be more sustainable. So, but I do yield for further discussion or comments from the Oversight Chair.
Right. Senator Therese, if you could comment on the amendment of the amendment. There was an amendment, she proffered, to delete the not.
Okay.
That was, and that may be subject to returning it back.
All right.
Yes.
Yes, I too want to thank the sponsor for this. It highlights, one of the ways that GMH can do its share to take care of everything that it absolutely can before we have to give them subsidies, right? And so a large part of their operations are funded through revenue that they get through billing, of course. The last audits that I remember reading talked a lot more about the collections, that lack of collections versus really the rates. But I agree that they should, of course, be adjusting their rates as quickly as possible. And if they should have done it a while ago, then then they're late. But I also hesitate to mandate them to do anything right now just because they've already got that mandate. I think they should be reviewing. I know that I see periodically the notices of their hearings for their automatic 5%, to raise fees by 5%. So they have public hearings on that, and then they get raised, on approval by the board. They don't come down here. But this is for those fees that are greater than that. So I appreciate that eventually those types of fees are going to come down to the legislature for approval, unless this bill was trying to say, I was a little confused about the language myself, because it says that it's going to be submitted to the governor for approval and then transmitted to the legislature, but it's not necessarily oh, sorry. Okay, I'm reading a totally wrong version. Just give me 1 second. Schedule house fees. All right, so it's no longer going. Okay, well, all right. I guess, Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, I hesitate to, do the board's job. This is supposed to be the board's job. They're supposed to be pushing the hospital to get their fees updated when they need to do that. And so I would just like to give them an opportunity to do that. And I would also, we're going to hear the rates, so I don't think there's any harm. But because we have Mr. Byrne here, if my memory is correct, Mr. Byrne was the CFO at the Guam Memorial Hospital for several years, and they always said he did an excellent job. So if I could just ask you, Mr. Byrne, your experience with fees that are, are they at Medicare rates or are they not? And what is the impact that you expect this to have? Are there many fees that are not in line? And is this language rates that are less than appropriate?
Let me, if I may, clarify. I was assistant CFO for about 18 months. Based upon what the senator was talking about earlier, you do need the not in there. I think there are two things going on. One is to correct the rates that are less than the Medicare rates. And that was an ongoing exercise when I was there. The second exercise is how to raise the rates, and there are about 17,000 different rates in force in the hospital. They're entitled to raise the rates 5% a year, automatically by board approval. And every so often they establish new rates, and those are the hearings, Senator, that you were talking about. If they want to raise the rates by more than 5%, they're supposed to go through the AAA process. And I think that's what the senators were talking about before you spoke. There are a lot of rates, right? And in order to get them to recover, maybe I should put it this way, there are obviously some rates that are less than the cost of that particular care. And there are some that equal that care, and there are actually some that exceed that care, and that would be what would allow the hospital to generate some money. I guess the remedy that you're seeking here is similar to what would have been achieved by going through the AAA process. But I don't know, I don't recall actually the last time they tried to do that.
Mr. Byrne, while you were at the hospital, did you update rates to become closer to the Medicare rates? And did you try to match them, or you're saying some of them you tried to make more money?
Yeah. There were about, at the time I was there were about 200 rates that were less than the Medicare rate. And can I perhaps explain that there are prevailing Medicare rates that cover Guam and Hawaii, because Medicare rates do vary throughout the country. But we were the Medicare rates that GMH uses are the rates that cover Guam and Hawaii. There were about 200 that were less than those rates, and we identified those, and just before I got there were about 400 that were identified and were raised through the AAA process. It's a little bit more complicated than that, because if you just compare a GMH rate with a Medicare rate, sometimes it looks as though it's less, but GMH has 2 charges, but Medicare only allows you to have 1 charge. So it's a fairly intricate process, is what I'm trying to say, to study these rates and to get them absolutely correct.
Mr. Byrne, if I can ask you to speculate a little here, because there was a quote from the public hearing that the disparity is crippling. So maybe that was made by the administrator of the hospital, but the disparity, isn't there also a disparity between the GMH's Medicare rates and other entities? Or, I'm thinking maybe that's also what they were talking about.
Yes, and as you recall, GMH has recently been successful in getting a rebasing that did correct some of that disparity. I don't believe it corrected the whole of the disparity. A new facility has the advantage of starting with a clean slate. The problem with an old facility like GMH is that absent the rebasing, you have an annual adjustment, and that annual adjustment doesn't always make up for medical inflation. Even though, and the reason for that is because we're tied to the rates that I mentioned before, Guam and Hawaii. So, I guess to speculate is difficult because, frankly, there are only 2 hospitals here, so it's difficult to compare one rate with the other. Obviously, GMH has lower rates than a new hospital, and that in turn is partly due to the fact that the Medicare rate is partly cost-based. So the new hospital is able to recover the cost of its investment in buildings and equipment whereas GMH has already, you know, it's old, so there's nothing to recover because he's already recovered that in the past. It's a very intricate and difficult calculation, and I wish every power for those that are there now in their endeavors to do that.
All right, thank you, Mr. Byrne, and thank you, Mr. Chair. So, yes, I support the intention of the bill, but I would just, I mean, the amendment, I guess I just hesitate to mandate this on GMH to produce within 60 days, and I would prefer that, I think they're conscious of it, and I would just prefer that it be a board-led, mandate, unless they're really being delinquent, but I don't think they are, because they've actually been very successful in getting the rebasing of the Medicare rates, so they've been working very hard on that. I know that they've been increasing their rates with that 5% authority, like regularly, and so I am sure that they will get to this, but I do approve with the intent of this floor amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Does anyone else like to speak to this amendment so that I can ask the author, sponsor of the amendment to close? Yes, Senator Tello.
Okay, Mr. Chair, can we just get 1 minute? I already have the amendment here, but if we can just get 1 minute so I can find out where exactly we are, because if I'm not mistaken, we already proved to strike out not. That was the first amendment to the amendment, correct?
Right,
And that was already
that hasn't
cleaned?
been approved, where you're still speaking to the amendment of the
Can we
amendment.
take a short 1 minute, just 1 minute, second?
All right, we'll take a short recess. My colleagues, we are back from recess. Senator Kelly, you have an amendment, I guess, to your amendment.
Hungen. So if I can read my amended amendment or amendment to the amendment, it hasn't been voted on yet. To add a new section to Chapter 12, beginning on page 131. Section, alignment of hospital rates and fees, notwithstanding any other provision of law, the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority, GMHA, striking out shall, is authorized to formulate a fee and rate schedule of applicable hospital fees and rates, striking out that are less than the prevailing Medicare rates, within 60 days upon the effective date of this act. GMHA shall submit the adjusted fee and rate schedule to Legislature in Guam for approval. And then if this is approved, to allow the Legislative Council to place.
Thank you, Senator Kelly. On the amendment, do we have any questions from our members to this amendment? Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question to the proffer of this amendment, if she'll yield. There was an amendment to this amendment made to strike out the words that are less than the prevailing Medicare rates. And my concern is that we're now authorizing them to formulate a fee and rate schedule of applicable hospital fees and rates that could be well above the Medicare rates. And so there's no real cap on any of the fees that we could provide. So that's just my question, like, will there be a cap? And I understand that now this amended language would allow for the adjusted fee and rate schedule to come back to Legislature in Guam for our approval. But I just wanted to get some clarification on the strike through of those qualifications with regard to Medicare rates.
Thank you. Senator Kelly, do you
Okay.
yield to?
So there was quite some discussion about selecting the correct terminology, one that would give them the flexibility to let us understand what they found to be reasonable, what they found to help them be sustainable. And because it does come to the legislature for approval, where we have the opportunity to have public hearings, where we have the opportunity to hear from the community and all stakeholders, where we have the opportunity to amend or disapprove any portion or all of it as we see fit based on the testimony and our other assessments. I think it's important to be able to hear from the authority what they consider to be a reasonable and responsible rate scale, formulation of a fee and rate scale, and then for us to be able to, as a community, deliberate upon.
So I have just very simple. Guam Memorial Hospital Authority, is this excluding the board? Because you're talking about only the administrator. And Senator Therese mentioned earlier, she doesn't want to deny the board's responsibility. So, I mean, I just wanted to make sure that that's inclusive. The board, basically the board's going to be presenting this. Is that, maybe you want to add GMH board, or would that meet the requirements? I don't know. I just thought I'd ask that question to make sure it's inclusive of it. Senator Therese?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the amendment, I support this amendment. I think the hospitals indicated that they would be willing to try to get this done within 60 days. And I guess the intention is to get a list within 60 days that we can expedite for them. In other words, bypass the AAA process and put in place, if we find that to be reasonable or whatever we decide at that point. They could also go through the AAA for, in case they think we're not going to get to that point. So they've got, just an additional avenue to expedite if needed. they could even divide the lists up, as to expedite these. These are exactly at Medicare rates. These are higher. They might be more controversial, right? Things like that. So, but it gives them the authority, and definitely, I think the way it's written, that the board would get involved. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Does any member like to ask a question to the amendment? There being none, are there any objection to this amendment? There is an objection. Okay. All in favor of the amendment, please raise your right hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Motion passes. Now to the main amendment with the amendment. Senator Kelly. Thank you. Senator Tello.
To the main amendment, sir. Yeah,
Oh, sorry,
amendment
Mr. Chair.
to the amendment.
What did we just vote on? I thought we were voting on her brand-new passed-out.
Yes, we
yeah.
just, there was an objection. We voted on the amendment to the amendment.
Oh, I'm
Remember,
sorry.
she submitted an amendment.
I thought she
She
substituted
made,
it.
no,
Okay,
I
all
was, wish
right.
she did, but she didn't. So we're now to the main amendment with the amendment.
Yes. Thank you,
Amended
Mr.
amendment.
Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank the good author for that previous amendment made to her amendment to include me on that as well, because it does bring accountability by bringing it to the legislature to have that last approval of this. If we see fit that an economic impact study is needed, then the legislature will require that before moving forward. So I'm content with that part. Is authorized, shall, changing that definitely makes a big difference too, as well. It's not forcing the Guam Memorial Hospital to do it. They can, like the previous speaker said, that they can do the AAA process as well. So I stand in full support of this amendment, Mr. Chair, and would like to withdraw my objection. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have an objection to this amendment? Amended. Okay. Are there any objection to this There being none, this motion passes. We will now move to Senator Luis Muñoz. No, you're done. You're done. I have, Senator Luis Muñoz, you have an amendment to follow on section 31, page 131.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am, your amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wasn't too sure. I thought we were going to put this in the chapter 13.
No, this is appropriate right here.
Okay, thank you. It's your call, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, the amendment that I passed out, it's passed out to everyone, is appropriations to UOG for scholarships and training programs appropriated in fiscal year 2019. All funds appropriated to the University of Guam and the Guam Community College for student financial assistance and scholarship programs in Public Law 34-116 that have not been expended in fiscal year 2019 are available for use for student financial assistance and scholarship programs in fiscal year 2020. And so the UOG Financial Aid Office administers the programs, scholarship programs for UOG and GCC. As we already know, the academic year for students at both institutions has already started. It's still FY 2019, which means that scholarship recipients are funded by appropriations in the FY 2019 budget. This amendment will allow the UOG Financial Aid Office to continue to use these funds for the current academic year, and I ask my colleagues for support of this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Muñoz. I've spoke to the panel. They see no objection to that. It allows the University of Guam to have some flexibility. It's a continued solution. Okay. Are there any objection to this motion? There being none, Senator Vice, you object? Okay. All in favor of the motion to adopt this amendment, please raise your right hand. Motion passes. We are now at, I do have now, my colleagues, we have a total of, that I have on the table, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 amendments. I hope there's 6. I have in front of me 6 amendments. We're going to go with Senator Moylan, where we're going to go to Senator Kelly's amendment. She brought it up, and we have you at, and we're still on page 131. We still have for Senator Sabina Perez, 133, and you, Senator Moylan. It's all on page 133. So we're trying to close the issue of page 131. Senator Kelly.
Seduis Masi, Mr. Chair. So this would, on page 131, add a new section to the chapter of the bill as follows. A section, to add a new subsection 77133 to Article 1 of Chapter 77, Title 21, Guam Code Annotated to read. Subsection 77133, volunteer program within the Department of Parks and Recreation to be known as Imanautau Ginesgasan Guahan Zan Gefpagan Guahan. There's actually 2 Guahans there, so it should be Imanautau Ginesgasan and striking out the Guahan, Zangefpagan Guahan, and for that to be throughout. There is hereby established within the Department of Parks and Recreation, Imanautau Ginesgasan Zangefpagan Guahan, a program that shall consist of individuals who desire to assist the department on a voluntary basis with the department's upkeep and maintenance of those public parks under its jurisdiction. The director may recruit or volunteer volunteer who desires to so assist the department, provided the individual shall, 1, be at least 18 years of age, and 2, satisfy any other qualifications or requirements established by the director. Section B. The director shall issue identification cards and uniform shirts to volunteers recruited under subsection A of this section. The identification card shall be visibly displayed, and the uniform shirt shall be properly worn by the volunteer when performing any upkeep and maintenance work. C. Each member of Imanautau Ginesgasan Zangefpagan Guahan who successfully contributes at least 20 hours per month shall receive an honorarium of $150 per month to defray the costs of maintenance of their personal equipment and their travel costs. The department shall identify funds within its appropriations to satisfy the intent of this section. So I will say, in the months that I've had oversight over the Department of Parks and Recreation, it has been very interesting to me that retired members of our community have come up to me and they have said that they would like an opportunity like this, that they want to give to the community. They have done similar work in the past for the Department of Parks and Recreation, and that they are looking for an opportunity like this to be able to formally have a relationship with the Department of Parks and Recreation and adopt a park in a sense, or otherwise help take care of. These are people who they're retired, have had very full lives and very full careers, and they really want to spend a part of their time giving back to the community and the neighborhood that they live in this manner. So I hope it receives favorable consideration by my colleagues.
Thank you, Senator Kelly. That was a great statement, because I know several groups that are adopting, but you got volunteering, you mentioned that, but then you add a payment in the back. So how does that work out?
Well, it's a stipend. It's one of the things that they had said. There was this gentleman who had taken on the responsibility of mowing one of the parks in his neighborhood, and he did this for an entire year. In fact, he even bought a riding lawnmower to be able to do this. And he said the one issue that he would like to, see that he would appreciate is at least the expense of the gas that it took to bush cut or mow the lawn. And so with this amount, it allows them to get their equipment to the location, and then it actually pays for the gas that they would use in their bush cutter or in their riding lawnmower or regular lawnmower.
Thank you, Senator Kelly. Does anyone would like to speak to this? Or is there any objection to this amendment? No, Senator Jim Moylan, sir.
I commend the author for the site of seeking volunteers by Department of Parks and Recreation, and I think it's a great idea. I don't know if there a certain amount of people that were volunteering, or are we going to have so many people running up and try to volunteer for $150 per month. We have many organizations that do volunteer and that do adopt parks and that don't ask for money. If we are seeking volunteers and letting them know they can receive some money, I don't know how fair that will seem to these other organizations that have been adopting parks for years and years and years. And also donating concrete structures and making benches, planting plants, and doing a whole bunch of things. I think volunteers is a great idea, and I think the director should be out on the streets on this corner and holding up a sign saying we need volunteers. But to expect payment coming from us, from our government that is at a situation where we're wondering if anybody can volunteer money to give us to help with our general fund, I don't think now may be the right time. I think maybe as our economy grows, we can probably do something for that purpose, but at this time, I do think it's a really good idea. I commend the author. But let's keep volunteer as volunteer to keep it equal for those that are currently volunteering and doing this work without expecting any money. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Is that an objection then to the amendment?
Yes,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Chairman.
Does anyone like to speak?
Point of information, or,
Yes.
well, I'll let others go ahead, but I
Yes.
do have a point of information.
Yes.
Have her say the point of information.
You want
please.
her point first?
Yes, please.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Senator Kelly,
Point of information.
your point of information.
Sujus Masi. So as I mentioned, this gentleman had donated a year of his time, and he was using his own equipment, and to expect him to necessarily, as an individual who really wants to give and really wants to see good things happen in his neighborhood, to not be able to give him a little bit of support, at least for the cost of the gas, I think is reasonable. But this is going to be a program. So within the Department of Parks and Recreation, the director will absolutely be coming up with a program of having a certain number of volunteers, not too many, that they don't have full and comprehensive oversight over them. And then also, there is absolutely the opportunity for organizations to be part of this program. It doesn't have to be an individual. It could be a couple, it could be a family, it could be an organization. And they would be able to, as an organization, also be able to be eligible to recuperate some of their costs of the gas or the bush cutter, what do you call that wire? That bush cutter wire that they use. But also with the adopted parks. Because it is completely volunteer, now this one is tied into some accountability. There's 20 hours per month that they would be putting in, and there would be a system of checking that, of helping train them a bit as to what the requirements are, and then having the accountability of having put in the 20 hours and having people perhaps go by and make sure that the work was done, some sort of verification process. But this is a much more regular system then, that in order to achieve the recuperation of the cost of the gas and get the small honorarium or the small stipend, that, as I said, there would be those checks and balances. With the adoptive parks, we're very fortunate to still have many community members coming forward, but it can be harder for them to maintain the park as regularly if there are not some of those checks and balances or checking in with the parks. And in this way, we're assuring that there is going to be more regularity to this. So we have put in some checks and balances here. And so I think, and it comes out of the Department of Parks and Rec's own system, so that it's fully sustainable and it's all within the Department of Parks and Rec itself.
Thank you, Senator Kelly. Madam Speaker, did you want to make a statement?
Jesus Masi, Mr. Chair, and I just want to share my thoughts on this amendment as proffered by my good colleague from Nimitz and my vice chair, and I'm her vice chair for Parks and Recreation, and I want to say that as this program is looking for its success with the Department of Parks and Recs, and us knowing that we have that we have similar programs out there, like reserve programs with the courts, with the GPD, with fire, and other projects that are out there. I know some might say that you're no longer a volunteer if you receive a single penny or a single dollar to that. And I understand the concept with the program about at least just getting the reimbursement for a little for what has been put in. So I literally think that this program being implemented and being adopted and being put into this provision is a positive project moving forward. I want to say that in the efforts of working with the Lieutenant Governor and the Department of Parks and Recs, and a lot of retirees out there, seniors, who literally want to just give back to their community and just being able to feel proud about what they want to do. Mr. Chair, I've walked the Paseo and the parks there, and you'll be surprised at the work that the employees do to clean up the place early in the morning. And by 8 o'clock, you go back because you're one of those late walkers and you're already going to see trash. And I just, you know what, any way that we can help and support that and not having to hire people. It's a program that we should at least give it a shot. And I just want to say I thank the good author for looking at this program and giving it the viability that it needs to help Parks and Recs, because that was an agency that has been cut from 400 employees more than a decade ago to now less than 60. So I just think that it's a good program, and I hope to give this a chance. So I hope that my colleagues will help support the efforts.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Senator Tello Taiwi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this is a red flag on the field here. I say that because this is not in the law currently, and you have gavelled in out of order on certain amendments that was not in the Guam Code annotated, and it's not supposed to be here. So the good author has a great heart. She has a big heart. I understand what she's trying to do, and I hope that she introduces a bill that does just what she wants to do. But, you know, Mr. Chair, consistency, you have ruled out of order, and I'm you know, announcing out of order because this law is not even created. And what even prompted me is stipends, the word stipends. Oh my gosh, you know, that's a whole new field, you know, to be created on stipends. So that word was used. So, well, not created, but like the process of creating stipends. But, and that's through legislation. And I hope she decides to continue on with this, but Mr. Chair, I would have to rule this out of order because it's not germane. Thank you.
Thank you. We also have an objection. Does anybody, anybody else would like to speak? I know there's an objection already, so Senator Therese?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I like this program. It looks like it may be successful. I understand the concerns about, you know, whether we need to vet it anymore, but what I think is that, of course, people are doing this already. They're volunteering and cleaning up our parks. They're very much helping the government of Guam in what is our responsibility, and we see it every weekend for sure, and sometimes even weekdays. I think I would like to see it, you know, be adopted. It doesn't require that the director is going to do rules, which is normally what you're going to do with a program like this, so that it's implemented fairly across the board. And so I think, you know, what causes a lot of concern is that we get money involved here, and then that just changes the whole picture. And then you really need the rules, because then we don't want, you know, problems. And so what I want to say is, if with all due respect, I would like to just move to delete section C. I think there's nothing right now that prevents the director from paying for gas, paying for costs, paint, all of that kind of stuff that he feels is necessary for these parks. So he can absolutely reimburse or make an arrangement for those types of expenditures. And then this part, and maybe just this part about the honorarium, can be vetted a little more so that we just find a way to make sure that it's implemented fairly. That would be my suggestion,
yes.
Mr. Chair.
Your amendment is to strike letter C.
That's correct.
Are there any objection to striking letter C?
I object.
You object. We have two objections. All in favor of the amendment to strike letter C in the amendment? I understand. You want to call it out of order. Senator Moylan, I know you object. Please raise your hand. To support striking letter C. In other words, remove the payment, honorary payment, because they're volunteers. To strike letter C, nobody wants to strike. They just want the whole amendment gone. Then we have two. Motion fails. Back to the amendment. Does anyone would like to speak? Because there is an objection to the amendment. No, nobody else? All in favor of this amendment? Please raise your right hand. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. Motion fails. We will now move to, we have completed page 131. All right? We are now on page 132, administrative provisions. I do have several amendments here, but they're not until page 133 and beyond. Are there any questions for page 132? There being none, 132 is closed. We are now on page 133, and we're at the section of, the first section. We have, I beg your pardon? No. Well, that's why I asked about 132. So, you know, folks, I think we've been on 131 long enough that we should, 132 shouldn't be that hard. 130, I'm looking at the amendments in front of, on my table. I have Senator Sabina, line 4, 133. And then also Senator Sabina, line 4, 133, and it talks about travel. I think we got the pages wrong, then, if that's the case. Senator Sabina, do we got the page wrong on your amendment? So we can say we're actually should have been on 132 because it's about travel? Because on 133, there is a section for travel, so maybe
Yeah,
that was your
it's-
intent on
It's
133.
actually, no, it's a correct page.
It's the correct page?
Yeah, it's
So-
basically a sub-line under I, item I.
Under I, okay, so we're on the right page, it's on travel. We're just not on page 132, we're on page 133, correct?
Yes.
And you have two. So-
Yeah, I replaced it, I substituted it. So the newest version is, it has
It's about 5 lines?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yes.
Right, okay, so the first one with the, right, that says part 1 of whatever is gone. Okay. So if you can please, proceed, Senator Paris?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So the amendment reads, "All individuals traveling for this purpose shall submit a report highlighting the impact the information gathered at the conference or meeting has on the agency, how the information acquired will be incorporated into the agency's functions. A presentation of the information obtained from the meetings and conferences may be required at the discretion of the agency's director." So I understand there are reports that have to be submitted as part of travel, but I think what this amendment does, it reinforces the idea that, it kind of sets the attention that the travel should already have some sort of effect or purpose for the agency's benefit. I hear many stories about traveling, employees going out to conferences. They retain the information that should actually be shared. I feel that the information that is gathered using government funds is an asset of the government and should be shared with their colleagues. And I hear too many stories where this doesn't happen. The information's retained, and when that employee retires, that information goes with them. And whereas the agency could have benefited from that information. So this amendment is introduced to address that problem as one measure for accountability and transparency. Initially, I had required a presentation, but I think that's the teacher in me. So I understand that may be a difficulty to have presentations. So I made that as a optional option.
Thank you, Senator Paris. That's known in the military as a trip report. Thank you. I really appreciate this. Does anyone have any objection to this amendment? You want 1 minute? Not objection, but you want 1 minute? Okay, we'll take 1 minute recess.